Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to turn on the recording. That shows you how, that's what I get for getting a flu shot. I regret that I'm going to have to redo this recording, and I will do that. I guess there's really no point in recording then right now because I missed an hour. I'm going to take a short break. I need one, and I'm not going to go too much longer. So I just want to talk about one more item. So, well, let me go back there. Okay, I'm going to take a short break. Okay, in case you feel like I'm not really with it today, it's true, I'm not. Like I say, I just got my flu shot this morning, and unfortunately, the first hour of class, I forgot to hit the record button. Therefore, I will redo that first hour when I'll wait till I get home. I might wait till later on this evening, where we covered the correlated subqueries. And so this will be part 2 of the October 26th lecture, and I will re-record part 1. Well, okay, let me go back here to Canvas. So we've been talking about the correlated subqueries. And I'm going to be talking right now about derived tables. This will be the last topic of this module. And so what we call a derived table, sometimes you hear these called views. A derived table is a subquery that is defined in the from clause of the outer query. So we have seen thus far all of our subqueries have been defined in the where. Okay. I can also, since a query returns a table, I can select from a subquery. Okay, let's look at an example. We want the vendor name and the maximum payment total for each unique vendor. We do not know that the vendor name is unique, so we have to group by vendor ID. So we don't use these a whole lot. They're handy. So here's the issue is that we don't know that the vendor name is unique. I might have 2 companies. I span various states, and so within a state, the vendor name would probably be unique. I believe it would. So we might have 2 vendors named Daylight Donuts or something like that, because that's a common name for a donut shop. But they would be 2 different vendor IDs, therefore they are 2 different names. For example, we might have 2 people named John Doe. They would have different social security numbers. That's how we'd tell them apart. So I want the vendor name and the max. So let's pull these out. Let me put this over here into these are called derived tables. And essentially, it formatted it nicely when I put it over here. Essentially, notice I'm selecting from the subquery is defined in the from statement. So the subquery, what table is it? This is the table from which I'm selecting. What's the name of the table? D. Okay. Now, some things about a derived subquery. A derived subquery must name all of its fields. If I don't alias that field, it's going to barf. I'm expecting to see a red button even. You must alias all the fields. So I have anything that, yes, any calculated field. If it's aggregate, or if I'm, payment total plus one, that would not have a column name, so it would have to be given one. So it's required that you give it one. Now it's perfectly okay to have an inner join in here, or an outer join, or anything you want in that query. So this is just demonstrating using a subquery as the table. So let's see, what is this? Vendor ID, vendor name, the maximum payment total from vendors, inner join invoices, vendor ID, I group by vendor ID, vendor name. Okay, so this is pretty straightforward. I should be able to run this. So if I execute this, it should execute, and I get them thus. So everything's fine. I don't have any duplicates in here, so I don't. If I named another one IBM, it would have a different vendor ID. Okay. IBM would get mad. Now the trick here, since I'm grouping by vendor ID, that has to be output by this table, but vendor ID is, let's say it's confidential. In general, I'm not allowed, for example, that might be a social security number. Let's pretend it's social security. I cannot show your social security number as part of the output, but I have to use it to differentiate such that I don't group you. If your name's John Doe and I have two people thus named, I can't group them together. I have to be able to show them as two different entities. And I'm not allowed to show your social security number. Okay. Now, I don't know how I'm going to tell one from the other at the output, but let's say maybe we can somehow. Phone number or something. It could be. Yeah. It could be. I mean, we can't rely on luck in database. So that's what I'm saying, that when I say don't worry about it if you're off by one, if you've changed your data or something, it'll be different, but I'm going to see it. I'll see everybody's query the same way because it's on my data. So it is not correct or incorrect based on the data. So if I say 118 rows and you have 119 or 117, oh, well, somebody just changed the data. That happens all the time. So whether it's correct or not doesn't even depend on it returning any rows. Maybe there won't be any. But this guy right here, when I run this, I see 33 rows, but I see the vendor ID, which means I'm seeing your social security number essentially. I'm not allowed to see that. So I use the idea of the derived table to hide that. So the vendor ID is hidden down here. And then when I run this total thing, I only see the vendor name and my max. I'm not exposing the confidential data or data that might be confidential outside of the query. We haven't made a big deal out of it now, but in data, thus far we haven't. In database in general, we are fussy about hiding things from the end user. And that'll be that's one of the major topics in my advanced class, is hiding data that the public is not able to receive, because many times I will have confidential data in a database and my queries have to protect it diligently. Therefore, to return anything from a query that it doesn't have to, that if I say to return the return the vendor name and the maximum for that vendor, I mean vendor name and maximum for that vendor, and only that. Right. So in order to, if I have two vendor names that are the same, I will have two different, maybe different, my max. Okay, that's fine. And I have John Doe and some number and John Doe again and some number. That's okay, but I cannot expose John Doe's social security number. Go ahead.
So just besides just security, or besides security, like could another reason for using this is that maybe vendor ID is just not relevant to this query because
it isn't. It didn't ask for it.
Vendor ID is
right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it is not considered cool in database programming to return anything that wasn't asked for and authorized to be returned. So you're always checking your, can I write this query? Am I legally allowed to write this query? So somebody from payroll wants information. Okay, are people who can see this, who is able to run this query, and are these people all their payroll department? So if you have an ID from payroll department, you're allowed to run this query. And then somebody else might want something from manufacturing. Well, are they in that department? Okay. So it would be wrong if I showed something to someone who wasn't allowed to see it. Even something trivial. Okay. We have a saying in particularly computer security that everything are data. All things are data. Meaning there is nothing so, everything you say is used as an attack on you or your company or some way. That's why when you talk about security, it's securing that human element is the toughest one. And people would like to just show me all the information. Well, you can't. Okay, and so the derived table is a way that I have of using information that I have to get it, without exposing it. So I can filter it down, I can trim it down in the derived table. I can also interjoin a derived table. I can take unions of derived tables. I can do anything I can do. So always remember a SQL query is a table. It always returns a table. Therefore, I can step outside of that query, call it a table, give it a name. The other point about a derived table is, and people always forget this one, you must alias the table. Questions? You must alias the table. See it? I don't care what you, go ahead.
That alias, it can't be used in another query or another.
Could it be used in another query? Yes.
Another
It certainly could be. For example, I could take an inner join as D, and then I could say inner join some other query, open inner join, open parentheses, another query, close parentheses as E, where D dot is equal to E dot, some field name. So all those fields are visible throughout the query. D will be visible and these fields will be visible.
Well, I mean, D is only visible within this select statement, this select vendor map. Like you just write a whole new select statement after this one.
Let's see, as D.
Like this is not a table that persists. Right?
It doesn't persist, no. If I go to another query. Yeah. Now, I can talk about this briefly. I'm going to talk about it more later. I can create, all right.
Oh, but that's like another thing.
Okay. I can make it persist,
Okay.
but I have to create something called a view.
Okay.
A view is essentially I take a SQL query like this one and give it a name, and I say create a view named D as that query. Now it exists. Now that name exists, and I can select from it. That's what I usually do.
But that's not what this does.
Not what this does. This doesn't create it to persist. This just creates it right now. Just it's in existence for just a moment. Let me see what else we've got here. A derived table may participate in a table join. This textbook example of page 201. Basically, in this case, we've used the derived table to remove possibly sensitive information. The alias statements highlighted in red are not optional. You must name every derived column. So if it doesn't have a name, you must name it. And this one, you must name the derived table. Don't use these a whole lot, okay? For the most part, if I'm going to use one, I will probably go outside of it and create the table, create the we call it a view, and it's essentially an SQL that when you select from it, it runs the SQL, but it's a name, so you don't have to rewrite this every time. So if I'm going to do it very much, if I'm just doing it once, I might do it with the derived table. Derived tables aren't as useful as the others. Probably the hardest one to understand is the correlated subquery, and I get to do that part of the lecture again. Let's see if we are finished. Okay, the quiz. I don't recall whether I have any derived tables or not. I would expect you to know what a derived table is. I would expect that if I gave you a problem like, for each term or something, for each member of table A, I want some aggregate function of table B where there is a one-to-many relationship. So when you hear that word for each, that's the key word that tells you that it's a correlated subquery. If I said, here is a correlated subquery, and I would expect you to be able to write one. I probably would not just throw it at you out of the blue. For example, when we do an outer join, I was fairly explicit about saying there's basically two jobs an outer join does, right? It finds unmatched parents and it finds invalid children and others from time to time, but there's basically two for this class. And so I would expect you to be able to read the assignment, read the problem, and tell which one of those it is. First of all, is it an outer join? Am I looking for am I looking for childless parents, or am I looking for unmatched children? Okay, it's going to be one of those. Now there are other uses for an outer join, but those are the biggies. And let's see. Okay, look, I'm going to wrap up here because I'm feeling like crap from my flu shot. So I'm going to do the first hour of the lecture again. I'm going to go ahead and save this one. Anybody from Internet land need to say anything?
Hope you feel better.
No, thank you. Just a thank you.
Okay, Anita. Anybody else? See, Doug, I see you. Who else do I have? I got Anita, I got Doug, and somebody else here?
Yes.
Yeah, who's this?
Taylor.
Oh, okay. You're just on a cell phone, so I don't see your log in.
This is Doug. I don't have any questions.
Okay, Doug. All right, I'm going to log in and I'll record that again. I'll give you I'll send the files to you via an announcement. And so I'm going to go ahead and end the recording now. Stop recording.